Someone in Florida called 911 because a manatee crawled out of a swamp and they thought it was a demon. And that is somehow only the 46th dumbest call on this list. We've got leprechauns digging up lawns, a kraken made entirely of seaweed, and a man who accused his Wi-Fi of being haunted by Bigfoot. And every single one of these is a real call. If you've ever wondered how America's 911 dispatchers haven't all quit and moved to the woods, stick around. Because today we're counting down 49 times people genuinely lost their minds. Drop a comment with which one you think is the dumbest, and subscribe so YouTube stops hiding us from you like we're a cryptid. 1. A man in rural Alabama called 911 to report a dragon in his backyard. Officers arrived expecting chaos. What they found was a peacock that had escaped from a neighbor's farm. The peacock was fine, completely unbothered, strutting around like it owned the property. The man was furious that dispatch was laughing instead of sending backup. The peacock was returned safely. The man never fully recovered from the embarrassment of being outsmarted by a bird. 2. A Florida woman called 911 insisting a mermaid was stuck in her above-ground pool and urgently needed rescue. Officers rushed over expecting something extraordinary. What they found was an inflatable pool toy slowly deflating near the drain. A golden retriever was standing next to it looking equally confused. The woman was convinced it had been alive. The dog had no comment. Officers filed the report. The inflatable mermaid did not survive the encounter. The dog got a treat anyway. 3. A Pennsylvania woman called 911 at 2 a.m. reporting leprechauns digging up her front lawn. Officers arrived with flashlights ready. What they found was a family of armadillos rooting through the grass, looking for grubs. Nobody called animal control. Everyone just stood there confused. Armadillos in Pennsylvania made less sense than leprechauns. The woman felt partially vindicated. The armadillos had no permits and no explanation for being there. The lawn was destroyed, and the mystery of how they got to Pennsylvania remains unsolved. 4. An Ohio man called 911 reporting a unicorn galloping down Interstate 71. Dispatchers assumed the worst. Officers arrived to find a white horse that had escaped its trailer during transport. It was magnificent. It was also wearing a traffic cone on its head like a horn. It had been running free for 20 minutes. 3 patrol cars were needed to slow it down. The horse was uninjured and unbothered, and the traffic cone was undamaged. The unicorn theory was officially ruled out, but quietly respected. 5. A Texas woman called 911 demanding officers shoot a chupacabra on sight after it attacked her chickens. She was furious. She was certain she had done her research. Officers arrived and identified the creature immediately. It was a raccoon with severe mange that had lost most of its fur. It looked absolutely terrible. It looked like a nightmare. Officers agreed it was deeply unsettling. They also agreed it was still just a raccoon. The woman was unconvinced. The chickens were unavailable for comment. 6. A Wisconsin man called 911 claiming a shape-shifting witch had been following him for hours through his neighborhood. Officers arrived concerned. They found him sitting on his porch completely fine but visibly exhausted. Turns out he had been watching The Craft on repeat for 6 straight hours. He had also not eaten a single thing all day. Officers strongly recommended a sandwich and some sleep. He disagreed. He was certain the witch was real. The witch never showed up. The sandwich remained unconsumed. 7. A Georgia woman called 911 screaming about a giant spider the size of a Buick in her bathroom. Dispatchers logged the call professionally. An officer arrived prepared. Upon entering the bathroom, the officer also screamed it was a wolf spider. A very large wolf spider sitting completely still on the tile wall. And both the woman and the officer stood in the hallway for several minutes. Nobody wanted to go back in. A second officer was called. The spider was eventually removed. Everyone needed a moment afterward. 8. A Louisiana man called 911 every night for a week, claiming the rougarou was knocking on his front door at exactly midnight. Officers took the calls seriously. They set up and waited. What knocked on the door was a three-legged stray cat, and it had learned to headbutt the door with surprising force to ask for food. The sound in a quiet house at midnight was genuinely alarming. Officers admitted that. They also started bringing the cat food. The Rougarou investigation was officially closed. 9. A California woman called 911, insisting fairies were stealing her car keys on a weekly basis. Officers arrived expecting a neighbor dispute or a prank. They found nothing suspicious. No signs of entry, no evidence of anything unusual. And the woman was completely serious. Officers spent an hour searching. The keys were eventually located inside the freezer sitting next to a half-eaten popsicle. The woman could not explain how they got there. Officers could not explain it either. The fairy theory was never officially ruled out. 10. An Arizona man called 911 to report a headless horseman riding through his neighborhood in broad daylight. Officers expected a Halloween stunt. What they found was a teenager on a horse dressed head to toe in black, riding to a costume party. The problem was it was March. There was no party anyone could confirm. The teenager offered no explanation beyond a vague shrug. The horse was licensed and healthy. The Headless Horseman report was filed. The teenager trotted away without looking back. 11. A Montana couple called 911 convinced a Wendigo had eaten all 14 of their cattle overnight. They were panicking. They had heard strange sounds. They had seen nothing but empty fields at dawn. Officers searched the entire property with flashlights. Every single cow was eventually found sleeping peacefully behind the barn in a tight group, completely unbothered. Not one of them had moved in hours. The Wendigo was never located. The cattle were fine. The couple was embarrassed. The barn has a blind spot nobody had noticed in 12 years. 12. A New Jersey man called 911 to report a troll living under the bridge at the end of his street and charging people tolls. Officers arrived expecting graffiti or a homeless situation. What they found was a retired toll booth worker who genuinely missed his job. He had set up a small folding chair and a tip jar. He was not aggressive. He was not threatening. He was just sitting there. Several neighbors had actually been paying him out of respect. Officers had a long conversation with him. The tip jar had $42 in it. 13. A Tennessee woman called 911 screaming that something was wailing outside her bedroom window every single night for 2 weeks. She had not slept. She was exhausted and terrified. Officers arrived after midnight and listened carefully in the dark. The responding officer identified the sound within 4 minutes. It was a family of foxes in heat making their mating calls in the tree line behind her house. The officer described the sound as arguably more terrifying than anything supernatural. The woman agreed. She moved her bedroom to the other side of the house immediately. 14. An Indiana man called 911 to report the Mothman perched on his roof staring down at him. He refused to go back inside. He was standing in his driveway in pajamas pointing upward. Officers arrived and aimed their flashlights at the roof. Sitting at the very peak was a great horned owl, an enormous one. It was staring directly at the man with complete intensity and zero concern for his feelings. Officers agreed the stare was unsettling. The man refused to accept it was just an owl. The owl never blinked once during the entire investigation. 15. A Colorado woman called 911 to report a yeti ransacking her campsite in the middle of the night. She had heard crashing and seen something enormous and white moving through the dark. Officers arrived and found a black bear that had somehow gotten its entire head stuck inside a white camping cooler lid. It was stumbling around completely blind and extremely frustrated. It had already destroyed the food supply and a folding table. Officers spent 30 minutes safely removing the cooler lid. The bear walked away without acknowledging anyone. The Yeti theory was gently set aside. 16. A Michigan man called 911 demanding authorities be immediately alerted about a sea serpent he had spotted in Lake Erie. He was urgent. He was certain. He sent a photograph as evidence before officers even arrived. The photo was examined carefully by 2 officers and a harbor assistant. It was a log. A large floating log with one curved end that did look vaguely serpentine if a person was tired and hopeful. The man refused to accept the log explanation. He submitted the photo to 3 cryptid websites. One of them published it. The log is still out there. 17. A South Carolina woman called 911 insisting a ghost had been rearranging her living room furniture every single night for a week. She had set up a system to track movement. Officers arrived and searched the house thoroughly. They found her teenage son had been sleepwalking almost every night and had absolutely no memory of any of it. He had also eaten an entire pot of leftover chili on one of those nights and had no memory of that either. The ghost theory was ruled out. The sleepwalking was confirmed. The chili incident remained a sore subject. 18. An Oklahoma man called 911 claiming he had physically caught a live goblin in his garage and needed someone to come identify it immediately. Officers arrived expecting some kind of animal situation. What they found was a possum that had gotten tangled in a piece of shredded silver wrapping paper. It had wrapped around the possum like a cape. The possum was hissing aggressively and looked genuinely furious about its situation. Officers admitted the silver cape did add a certain mystique. The possum was released outside. It dragged the wrapping paper with it on the way out. 19. A Minnesota woman called 911 to report that a river witch had hexed her boat engine on the lake, and she needed immediate assistance. She was stranded and furious, and completely certain dark forces were involved. A Marine officer arrived by water within 15 minutes. He checked the engine for exactly 45 seconds. The boat had run completely out of gas. There was no hex. There was no witch. The gauge had been broken for 2 seasons, and she had never replaced it. The officer radioed in the situation. Dispatch went very quiet for a long moment. 20. A New York City man called 911 to report a gargoyle had come to life on the building across from his apartment and was watching him through the window. Officers arrived and looked across the street. Standing completely still on the opposite corner was a man in a full Halloween gargoyle costume. He was not moving. He was waiting for an Uber at 3 a.m. He had been standing there for 22 minutes, and the Uber was running late. He did not acknowledge anyone. The costume was extremely convincing. The original man felt partially justified. The Uber eventually arrived. 21. A Kentucky caller spotted the beast of Busco in their pond and demanded federal intervention immediately. Officers arrived expecting something massive. Rangers brought measuring equipment. The legendary giant turtle was carefully pulled from the water and measured on the bank. It was 11 inches wide. 11. Now the caller stood firm and insisted size was relative. Rangers disagreed professionally. The turtle was returned to the pond unbothered. It had no idea it was famous. The federal intervention request was formally declined. 22. A Virginia man called 911, reporting a sphinx had appeared in his cornfield and was asking riddles to passing neighbors. Officers arrived curious. What they found was a giant foam promotional mascot for a local corn maze that had blown over in strong winds overnight. It was face up in the dirt staring at the sky. It was not asking riddles. It had never asked riddles. The man was disappointed. The corn maze owner was contacted. The sphinx was recovered and returned to active duty. 23. An Illinois woman called 911 saying a kelpie had cursed her after she swam in a local lake. She was extremely specific about the mythology, and the responding officer had never heard of a kelpie in his entire career. He sat in the parking lot for 4 minutes Googling it before walking to her door. She explained everything in detail. He listened respectfully. He filed the report under general disturbance. He went home that night and Googled kelpies again out of personal curiosity. He now knows more than he ever expected. 24. A Washington state man called 911 furious that a Sasquatch was stealing his Wi-Fi. He had checked his network and found an unknown device connected without permission. The device was named Bigfoot_5G. Officers traced the signal. A neighbor's teenage kid had named his phone that as a joke exactly 2 years earlier. The phone had been auto-connecting ever since. The teenager thought it was hilarious. The man did not. The Wi-Fi password was changed. Bigfoot_5G was never seen on the network again. 25. A Missouri woman called 911 convinced a skinwalker had replaced her husband sometime during the previous week. She listed specific behavioral changes as evidence. Officers arrived and questioned the husband directly. He was calm, he was cooperative. He eventually admitted he had gotten a haircut without telling her. She had not approved the new style. He thought it looked fine. She disagreed strongly. Officers mediated for 12 minutes. The skinwalker theory was officially closed, meaning the haircut situation was still unresolved when officers left the driveway. 26. A Massachusetts man called 911 insisting he had witnessed a kraken rising from Boston Harbor. He was breathless and certain. The harbor master was contacted immediately and checked the area. He confirmed it was a large, tangled cluster of seaweed pushed together by the current near the dock. He also noted the man was clearly not a local. Locals know the harbor. The man submitted a written statement anyway, and the harbor master framed it. It currently hangs in the harbor office break room. 27. An Iowa farmer called 911 saying a will-o'-the-wisp was luring his cows into the swamp every night. Officers arrived after dark to investigate the moving light. They found a teenage kid sprinting through the field in the dark with a flashlight. He was not luring cows, he was running away from the cows. The cows had been chasing him for 20 minutes. He had entered the field on a dare, and the cows were returned to the pen. The teenager was returned to his parents. Everyone involved was exhausted. 28. A North Carolina man called 911, saying something with glowing red eyes, was stalking him through the woods behind his house. Officers took it seriously and searched with flashlights. They found deer. 2 deer standing completely still between the trees, their eyes reflecting the flashlight beams directly back. The deer did not move. They just stared, and the officer admitted it was unsettling, even knowing what they were. The man refused to walk those woods again. The deer were there the following night doing the exact same thing. 29. A Maryland caller reported a phoenix rising dramatically from a dumpster fire behind a Wendy's on Route 40. The fire department responded immediately. They confirmed it was a regular dumpster fire of completely normal origin. As crews were working, a seagull flew out from behind the dumpster and away into the sky. One firefighter said it was actually pretty dramatic timing. The caller stood by the phoenix identification. The fire was extinguished. The seagull did not return. The Wendy's reopened the next morning without incident. 30. An Oregon man called 911 convinced a woman in white had appeared at the end of his driveway at 2 a.m. Officers investigated and knocked on doors. 3 houses down, they found a woman who had been sleepwalking. She was completely unharmed and had absolutely no memory of being outside at all. Officers walked her home safely. The original man was unsettled but relieved. The sleepwalking woman was equally unsettled upon being told. Officers agreed this explanation was somehow creepier than the original ghost theory. 31. A South Dakota man called 911, reporting thunderbird sightings over the Black Hills, and insisted authorities investigate immediately. Officers arrived and asked for a description. He pointed to a large turkey vulture circling slowly overhead. It was a turkey vulture, a regular one doing regular vulture things. The man had also been awake for 36 straight hours watching Ancient Aliens on repeat. Officers strongly suggested sleep. He declined. He filed his own separate report online that night. The turkey vulture was unavailable for comment. 32. A Connecticut woman called 911 saying gnomes had constructed a structure in her garden overnight while she slept. Officers arrived expecting something strange. What they found was a collapsed pile of wood and nails in the corner of the yard. Her husband stepped forward immediately. He had attempted to build a birdhouse the previous evening. It had not gone well. It had fallen into a shape nobody could identify or explain. He was embarrassed. She was unconvinced it was not gnome-related. The birdhouse was never rebuilt. 33. A New Mexico man called 911, reporting a chupacabra standing on the highway shoulder. He was calling from his moving vehicle at 80 miles per hour. He demanded a police escort immediately just in case the creature was fast. Officers responded and found nothing on the highway. The man had already passed the area by 14 miles before anyone arrived. He called back 3 more times during the same drive, each time from a different location. Officers tracked his route for 40 minutes. The chupacabra was never located. The man arrived home safely. 34. A Rhode Island woman called 911 at midnight convinced something ancient and enormous was rising from Narragansett Bay. She was panicked. She described churning water and a massive dark shape. An officers and harbor patrol responded quickly. They found fog, a tugboat moving slowly through the fog, and one very overactive imagination. The woman had finished reading her first Lovecraft story earlier that same evening. Officers gently suggested waiting before reading the next one. She did not wait. She called again 4 days later about something in the same bay. 35. A Maine man called 911 insisting a Selkie had stolen his fishing nets and dragged them out to sea. He was furious and demanded a marine investigation. Officers arrived and examined the situation from the dock. The nets had tangled around a buoy and drifted with the current. It was basic physics. The officer explained this clearly and professionally. The man listened carefully and then said he still believed it was a Selkie. Officers filed the report. The nets were recovered the following morning. The Selkie theory was noted in the official record. 36. A Louisiana woman called 911 at 9 p.m., demanding officers remove a curse object that had been placed on her front porch. She refused to touch it herself. Officers arrived prepared for something unusual. It was a wind chime. A perfectly normal decorative wind chime hanging from her porch beam. Officers confirmed it was not cursed. The woman explained her estranged sister had left it there as a passive-aggressive birthday gift. Officers understood immediately. One officer suggested it was arguably worse than a curse. The wind chime was removed as requested. 37. An Alaska man called 911 to report an ice giant blocking the main road and preventing people from passing safely. Officers drove out immediately expecting a serious situation. They found a glacier. A large glacier that had been sitting in that exact location for approximately 11,000 years. It had not moved recently. It had not moved in any recorded human memory. Officers confirmed the road was passable on the side. The man insisted it had not been there before. It had been there before. It will be there long after everyone involved is gone. 38. A Georgia man called 911, reporting a hydra in his backyard swimming pool. He was very specific. He described at least 3 distinct snakeheads rising from the water. Officers arrived and looked into the pool. 3 garden hoses had fallen in from the deck during strong winds the previous night. They were floating near the surface at various angles. The man pointed and said that was exactly what he saw. Officers explained the hoses. He listened and then said he still counted 3 heads. The pool was drained anyway, just to be safe. 39. A Mississippi woman called 911, saying a hag had been visiting her every night while she slept, and she needed it stopped immediately. The responding officer was a trained professional with 12 years of experience, and he sat on her front porch for 20 full minutes carefully and gently explaining sleep paralysis in plain, simple terms. She listened to everything. She nodded along politely. At the end, she thanked him and said she understood completely. Then she asked if he could come back tomorrow night just in case the hag returned. 40. A Utah man called 911 to report that unknown persons had constructed a golem on his street overnight. He described it as large, and menacing and staring directly at his house. Officers arrived and found a snowman. A very well-built snowman with a scarf, a hat, and what the reporting officer described as a resting scowl. The man insisted its expression was threatening. Officers measured it at 5 feet 4 inches tall. It was a snowman. A neighborhood kid claimed responsibility proudly. The man requested it be moved anyway. 41. Another, a Kansas woman called 911, saying a demon had possessed her television because it kept switching on by itself at exactly 3 a.m. every single night. She had unplugged it twice. It kept happening. Officers arrived and searched the living room carefully. Within 4 minutes, they found the cat. The cat had claimed the television remote as a sleeping spot every night without fail. It was sitting on the power button with its full body weight, completely unbothered. The demon theory was closed. The cat showed zero remorse and returned to the remote that same evening. 42. A Pennsylvania man called 911 to report the Jersey Devil had landed directly on his car hood overnight. He had photographic evidence and wanted a formal report filed. An insurance adjuster was contacted separately the same week. After examining the hood damage professionally, the adjuster confirmed the dent pattern was entirely consistent with a large Canada goose hitting the surface at full diving speed. And the man submitted both reports together. The insurance claim was approved. The Jersey Devil was listed as the responsible party in his personal records. The goose was never identified. 43. A West Virginia couple called 911 saying they had discovered a fairy ring in their backyard and were genuinely afraid to mow anywhere near it. They had researched the folklore thoroughly. Officers arrived and examined the grass. It was a circular patch of slightly darker lawn caused by a buried tree stump decomposing underground. Officers explained this clearly. The couple listened carefully. They then asked if it was still safe to mow. The officer said yes, absolutely. They decided not to mow it anyway. The report was officially filed under property maintenance. 44. An Arizona woman called 911 furious that her neighbor had been granted 3 wishes by a djinn, and she had not received any wishes herself. She felt this was deeply unfair. The dispatcher asked several clarifying questions professionally. The woman had detailed theories about how the neighbor had summoned the djinn and what the 3 wishes had been. The dispatcher stayed on the line for 11 full minutes. No officer was dispatched. The call was logged. The dispatcher went home that evening and told her entire family about it at dinner. 45. A Nevada man called 911 reporting a demon dog with 3 heads guarding the entrance to a desert cave outside town. He had seen it clearly and refused to approach. Officers arrived with flashlights and approached the cave entrance slowly. 3 coyotes had been sitting close together near the opening, sharing warmth in the cold night air. They scattered instantly the moment the flashlight hit them and disappeared into the dark within seconds. The man said that proved they were supernatural. And officers filed the report. The cave contained nothing unusual except 1 old boot. 46. A Florida man called 911 reporting a giant humanoid creature emerging slowly from the swamp behind his trailer in broad daylight. Officers arrived expecting an intruder situation. What they found was a manatee, a very large manatee that had wandered into extremely shallow water and was struggling to move with any dignity whatsoever. It was not emerging dramatically, and it was simply stuck and unhappy about it. Wildlife officers were called to assist. The manatee was guided back to deeper water. It left without acknowledging the crowd that had gathered to watch. 47. An Ohio woman called 911 reporting a banshee screaming in her attic every night for 3 straight days. She had not slept. She was certain something was dying up there. A wildlife officer climbed into the attic with a flashlight and a catch pole. He found a screech owl that had entered through a small gap in the fascia board. It was sitting in the corner, and it was absolutely screaming. The officer confirmed it was in fact screaming. The owl was carefully removed and released outside. The woman slept for 11 hours straight that night. 48. A Texas man called 911, insisting he had photographed a real thunderbird casting a massive shadow across his roof at dusk. He had printed the photo and everything. Officers examined the printed photograph carefully under good lighting for several minutes. It was the shadow of a ceiling fan. The man had photographed his own ceiling fan shadow through a window at an unusual angle as the sun went down. Officers explained the geometry involved. He listened. He looked at the photo again. He kept the photo. He still was not fully convinced. 49. A New Mexico woman called 911 at 4 a.m., reporting an alien-human hybrid standing in her driveway taking notes. She watched from her window for 20 minutes before calling. Officers arrived and found a graduate student in a bright, reflective safety vest holding a clipboard. He was conducting a neighborhood traffic pattern study for his university thesis. He had permits. He was completely legal. He was also equally unsettled by suddenly having 3 police cars pull up beside him at 4 a.m. Both parties filed statements. Both parties agreed the encounter was deeply uncomfortable for everyone involved. So there you have it. 49 completely real emergency calls about creatures that absolutely do not exist. Meanwhile, actual emergencies are on hold. Democracy is fine. Dispatch operators deserve a raise, and probably therapy. If you laughed at least once during this video, then you know exactly what to do. Hit like. Subscribe to BrainFumble. Turn on notifications so you never miss whatever unhinged topic we cover next. Share this with someone who would definitely call 911 about a unicorn. Now tell me in the comments, which one of these callers do you think was actually right?